We're moving into the network age. That means everything increasingly is connected. People, devices, networks, social relationships, everything that we can think of is being connected into this global network of networks. We all know this. We all know about these developments, about the internet and mobile communications and so forth, but I don't think anywhere we've fully appreciated their implications. Communications policy, media policy, and much of the way that we think about industries and technologies has always been driven by the idea of scarcity, that there are some limits. As we connect everything, the potential is there to replace that scarcity with abundance, to leverage the power of connectivity throughout the world. What this means specifically in telecommunications and media is that there are a series of radical transformations. In a digital world, there is no television, there is no phone service. These are all just different kinds of applications on the interconnected digital platform. The networks are no longer necessarily in control of the entire system. However, they remain incredibly important to facilitate the kinds of uses and activities that can happen on the network. Traditional ideas about economics and competition don't necessarily hold in the same way in a truly networked environment. If a network has enough capacity, then it can deliver new services and allow for new innovations coming from the users of the network. And that is where public policy decisions become essential. The decisions of policymakers determine how networks are structured and how entire network industries are structured. Digital television is an example of an industry where policy decisions, such as those Mr. Katayama talked about, as well as the ones that we made in the United States, are essential to realizing the potential of this digital technology. So let me talk about what digital television is really about. There are, in fact, 3 digital television transitions, not one. A transition in the devices, the equipment, a transition in the applications, the kinds of services that are delivered, and most important, a transition in the spectrum. In devices, digital means we are moving from a world of television sets to a world of many different kinds of intelligent nodes for distributing and accessing video. In applications, we are moving from a world of defined television programs on specific channels to a world of many different kinds of broadband video delivered in many different ways. And finally, in spectrum, we are moving from a world with defined broadcast frequency allocations to one where we understand that this is just capacity which can be used for the services that are most desired. The mission of policymakers must be to make available as much wireless capacity as possible. So my one message to you, if you take away one thing from this talk, is that digital television is not about TV. Again, it's about making available the opportunity for new investment and new innovation, taking advantage of this extraordinary resource of wireless communication. The U.S., we have about 112 million television households out of about 115 million. And as I'm sure you know, we have many big houses, so most people have more than one television in the house, about 300 million TVs in the U.S. About 200 local television markets, over 1,500 full-power television broadcast stations. So this digital television transition in the United States, which began in the 1990s and is now finally coming to a close, is a very large, complicated process. One important difference between the United States and Japan is the large deployment of cable and satellite TV in the U.S. About 90% of Americans get their television either through cable or through direct broadcast satellite. And those platforms are moving to digital as well. We also, in addition to that cable service, we still have many television sets in the US that are not connected to cable or satellite. So even though we have 90% of users on one of these other platforms, we still have, similar to Japan, over 100 million television sets that are analog. That's the way the market looks. In terms of the broadcast spectrum, we have roughly 400 megahertz of spectrum that has been allocated to broadcast television. 67 channels in each market, 6 megahertz each. So in the US, the FCC talks about 3 different mechanisms for spectrum allocation. The traditional mechanism is command and control allocation. The government decides who gets the spectrum and for what purpose. That is how the television broadcasters got access to their spectrum. The government gave it to them and said that it had to be used for broadcast TV. But the reform in the United States over the last 10 or 20 years has been to move away from that command and control model whenever possible. The 2 alternatives to command and control spectrum allocation are the exclusive rights model and the commons model. Exclusive rights basically means treat spectrum like other forms of property. Use the market and economic forces to decide what spectrum should be used for and who should be able to use it. At the same time, we have explored the commons model of allowing spectrum to be shared. The best example so far is Wi-Fi, which allows devices to share the same frequencies without getting exclusive permission from a regulator. Both of these models are valuable in different contexts. I'm going to talk today mostly about exclusive access to spectrum, but it's important to understand that the commons model is also very useful for making available new kinds of uses. The mechanism that the FCC uses today to allocate that exclusive rights spectrum is auctions. The theory of using auctions to allocate spectrum is not just to make money for the government. The theory of using spectrum auctions is, again, to get economic forces to determine how spectrum should be used. But the money that has been raised in the US spectrum auctions has certainly been very valuable in allowing this reform of the policy to go forward. 2 of the more successful auctions, the PCS 2G cellular auction and the recent 700 megahertz UHF auction, have each raised about 20 billion US dollars. There have been other auctions which haven't been as successful, but in general, the mechanism of using auctions has allowed new entrants and new innovations to come into the marketplace. This is how the US manages spectrum, and generally it's not thought of as being connected to digital TV. However, I think we were very fortunate in the US that we moved to these new models of spectrum allocation around the same time as we began our digital TV transition. Again, the real opportunity of this digital transition is making available more wireless capacity. So let me briefly describe the transition process that occurred in the United States. Again, this was a long and complicated process. I'm not going to go into every detail of the negotiations that happened. The first point is, as I said, that the digital transition started in the US in response to Japan. There was a strong desire to find new ways to transform traditional television. And I think the United States was lucky because we weren't the first to move to high definition. By the time we started, the technology had advanced to the point where it was possible to do fully digital TV. The basic structure of the process was that broadcasters were allocated new digital spectrum at the same time as they kept their existing analog spectrum. The price that broadcasters had to pay for getting this new spectrum for free was that they had to switch and implement the digital transition.